The undeniable spark. The screen fades in softly with gentle piano music. A slow montage of movie clips plays. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock standing side by side in Speed, smiling under the summer sun, then reuniting years later in the lake house. Their eyes meet through glass and time. Even people who never believed in movie magic admit there was something real between them. For years, fans have wondered if that spark was just acting or something deeper. Every look, every pause, every shared laugh on screen seemed to tell a story no script could fully write. It was chemistry that felt natural, quiet, and timeless, the kind that lives between two people who truly see each other. Then, years later, when everyone thought the mystery had faded into Hollywood history, Keanu Reeves said something that changed everything. The revelation came not from a red carpet or a film premiere, but during a quiet interview. The setting was simple. A small studio with warm lights and a calm interviewer who asked a question most people had already stopped asking. She said, "Keanu, looking back at your time with Sandra, was there ever more than friendship?" Keanu smiled, that small, thoughtful smile that hides entire worlds of meaning. At first, he gave the usual kind answer about respect, admiration, and how wonderful she was to work with. But then his tone changed. His eyes softened, and for a brief second, it seemed like he had traveled back in time. He said something no one expected. His voice was quiet, yet every word carried weight. "There was a moment," he said, "that changed how I saw everything. I never talked about it before because it wasn't about Hollywood or fame. It was about kindness, a kind I never forgot." The interviewer leaned in, sensing the depth behind his calm tone. The room went silent. Even the crew stopped moving. Everyone waited for him to explain, but Keanu just looked down, smiled gently, and said, "She probably doesn't even remember." That one sentence sent ripples through the internet. Fans began posting old clips trying to decode what he meant. Did he mean a private gesture? An unspoken love? Or a moment of compassion that defined their friendship? As the video spread, social media exploded. Headlines read, "Keanu Reeves reveals hidden truth about Sandra Bullock. The moment that changed their bond." What did Sandra do that Keanu never forgot? But behind the noise was something more personal, something deeply human. It wasn't about romance or rumor. It was about two souls who met at the right time, in the right way, and carried that memory quietly for years. The story of Keanu and Sandra began long before the cameras rolled. During the filming of Speed, Sandra was still finding her place in Hollywood. She was funny, full of energy, always bringing light to the set. Keanu, quiet and thoughtful, often stood apart, observing more than speaking. Their differences somehow balanced perfectly. One afternoon, during a short break between scenes, Sandra brought him a cup of coffee, something small, almost ordinary. But when Keanu took it, she laughed and said, "You looked like you needed warmth more than caffeine." It was such a simple thing, but he never forgot it. He later admitted in another interview, long ago, that Sandra's kindness had touched him. "She had this way of making people feel seen," he said. "You could be having the worst day, and she'd just smile. And somehow, it got better." But what people didn't know was that there was another moment, the one he hinted at recently, that went far deeper than kindness on a film set. It was something he had carried privately for decades. Something that reshaped his idea of love, trust, and quiet respect. Back then, during the lake house filming, Keanu had just gone through a difficult time in his personal life. Sandra, though unaware of the full story, noticed something different in his silence. One evening, after a long shoot, she quietly left a handwritten note in his trailer. She wrote only one line: "The world still needs your light, even when you can't see it." Keanu never spoke about that note publicly, not until now, and as he mentioned it in his recent interview, without naming the note directly, people began connecting the dots. The way he looked at her in interviews, the way they defended each other from unfair press, the quiet admiration that never faded even as decades passed. What made Keanu's revelation so powerful wasn't what he said, but what he didn't. The silence between his words carried emotion too strong for language, the kind that lives only in the space between gratitude and affection. fans began revisiting old footage, looking at moments that once seemed ordinary. Sandra laughing at Keanu's jokes during press tours. Keanu pulling out her chair during interviews, both glancing at each other when asked about love. Now, with this new revelation, those tiny gestures carried new meaning. It wasn't a love story in the usual Hollywood sense. It was something quieter, deeper, built on shared respect, kindness, and an understanding that didn't need words. As the clip continued to spread, celebrities also joined the conversation. One co-star wrote online, "I've never seen two people who care for each other so silently." Another commented, "Maybe this is what real connection looks like. No spotlight, no drama, just mutual light." Keanu's words reminded people that sometimes the strongest emotions are the ones unspoken, that a single act of kindness can echo through years and shape lives quietly. By the end of the interview, the host tried to ask another question, but Keanu just smiled again and said softly, "Some things are better left in the heart." That closing line left the audience stunned. Millions watched it again and again, trying to read the look in his eyes. Some said they saw love. Others saw peace. But everyone agreed on one thing. There was truth in that silence. As the first part of this story unfolds, one thing is certain. What Keanu revealed isn't just about celebrity or friendship. It's about how one person's quiet kindness can become a lifelong memory. And now, the world wants to know, what exactly did Sandra do that changed Keanu forever? The answer, as we'll discover in the next part, is hidden not in grand gestures, but in one forgotten day that neither of them expected would define their bond for decades. The revelation, Keanu's shocking confession, the next morning. The internet was still buzzing. Clips of Keanu's soft-spoken interview were everywhere, on news feeds, reaction videos, even short edits with emotional music. But no one could answer the same question. What was the hidden moment he spoke about? What did Sandra do that left such a lasting mark on him? A few days later, Keanu appeared again, this time at a small charity event in Los Angeles. It wasn't a red carpet, not a movie promotion, just a quiet gathering to raise funds for a hospital. Cameras flashed anyway because that's what they do when he shows up. Still, Keanu stayed his calm self, smiling politely, helping staff carry donation boxes, talking softly to children. Then, when the host of the event asked him about the viral interview, everyone leaned closer. The air changed. Reporters held their breath. Cameras stopped moving. This was the moment. The host said gently, "Keanu, everyone's been talking about your words about Sandra. Would you like to share what you meant?" Keanu hesitated. He looked down for a second, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the podium. Then he said quietly, "Sometimes people enter your life when you need them most, even if they don't know it. Sandra was one of those people for me." His voice carried that familiar kindness, but there was a depth to it, like each word came from somewhere far beyond memory. He paused again, then continued, "There was a day I'll never forget. It wasn't during filming, not during interviews, not even after. It was a day when I had lost something and she gave me back something I didn't think I could feel again." The crowd went still. He wasn't talking about a scene or a movie anymore. He was talking about life. He explained softly that years ago, after the lake house had wrapped filming, he had disappeared for a few days. No one knew where he was. He was grieving quietly, fighting something inside that words couldn't fix. He said, "I was in a place where everything felt heavy. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I had just lost someone who meant the world to me, and the silence after that loss was unbearable." People in the audience knew about Keanu's tragic past, the losses he carried, the quiet pain behind his gentle smile. But hearing him speak of it now, connected with Sandra's name, gave it all new meaning. He continued, "One night, I came home, and there was a package waiting by my door. No name, no address, just a small box with a ribbon. Inside was a card that said, 'Light still finds its way through broken windows,' and a candle. Simple, white, nothing fancy. But it was enough. I don't know how she knew. Maybe she didn't. But it changed something in me. His voice trembled slightly on the word changed. He didn't say Sandra's name, but everyone knew. Because years ago, in an old interview, Sandra had once shared a story that matched. She said, laughing gently, "I once sent someone a candle after a really rough time. I thought maybe a little light might help them." At the time, no one thought much of it. Now, years later, her words aligned perfectly with his. It was like two pieces of a puzzle finally fit together in front of the whole world. The host, moved and speechless, whispered, "Was it her?" Keanu smiled softly, the kind of smile that says more than any words could. "Let's just say," he replied, "some people bring light without asking for credit. And I've never forgotten that." That was the moment the crowd broke into quiet applause, not the loud kind of applause for fame, but the respectful one for honesty, for vulnerability, for a man sharing his truth not for attention, but for connection. Reporters captured every second. Within hours, social media was full of clips of Keanu saying, "Light still finds its way through broken windows." The phrase became a trend, a symbol of hope. People began posting pictures of candles, calling them the Sandra Light. Meanwhile, Sandra Bullock herself was filming overseas. When she saw the clip, insiders said she went silent for a few minutes, then whispered, "He remembered?" It had been years, decades even, yet that tiny gesture she'd made in quiet compassion had never left his heart. Later that week, Sandra posted a simple image on her private account, a single candle burning beside a window. No caption, no hashtags, just light. Fans immediately connected it to Keanu's story. It was her way of replying, not with words, but with understanding, and once again the world was moved. But the revelation didn't end there. Keanu later explained in another interview that the candle had become a reminder for him during difficult times, a symbol that kindness, even the smallest act, can bring someone back from darkness. He said softly, "That one small light reminded me to keep going. And it wasn't just about me. It reminded me that people care, even when you think they've forgotten." The simplicity of his words broke through all the noise. It wasn't about love stories or gossip anymore. It was about human connection, the power of gentle gestures that never fade away. Fans began rewatching the lake house with tears, saying they could now feel the truth behind every glance, every pause. One fan wrote online, "You can see it in their eyes. Two souls who understood pain and still chose kindness." A film critic added, "It's rare to witness authenticity between actors that lasts decades." What Keanu revealed wasn't confession, it was gratitude. The more people talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a typical Hollywood revelation. This was a lesson about how kindness outlives everything else. By the end of that week, both Keanu and Sandra had unintentionally reminded millions that fame fades, beauty changes, but compassion stays. In one emotional moment, Keanu rewrote what it means to honor someone. Not by headlines or rumors, but by gratitude that spans years. And still, there was one more question no one had asked yet. Why did he choose to reveal it now after all this time? In Part 3, the story goes deeper as we uncover what made Keanu finally speak and how that choice would lead to a chain of kindness neither of them could have imagined. Unpacking the depth. A new perspective on their bond, the video of Keanu's confession kept spreading. Millions of views turned into tens of millions. But beyond all the headlines and excitement, something deeper was happening. People weren't just watching. They were feeling. For many, it wasn't about romance anymore. It was about how two people, through kindness and honesty, could change how we see connection itself. For years, fans had seen Keanu and Sandra as symbols of chemistry. Two actors who simply clicked. But after Keanu's revelation about the candle and the note, everything started to look different. Old interviews resurfaced. Fans slowed down clips, watching their eyes, their smiles, the pauses between sentences. In one interview from years ago, when a reporter asked Sandra if she ever had a crush on Keanu, she laughed shyly and said, "He's the kind of person who you can't not like. He's just Keanu." Then she paused, looking down for a second before saying softly, He's someone I'll always admire. Now, that small moment carried new meaning. Maybe that admiration was deeper than anyone realized. Maybe it wasn't about love or fame at all, but about how two people recognized something rare in each other: quiet strength. As people dug deeper, more hidden moments appeared. During a press tour for the lake house, Sandra noticed a nervous young journalist drop her notepad. Before security could react, Keanu bent down, picked it up, and smiled at her gently, saying, "Don't worry, we all drop things sometimes." Sandra's reaction? She looked at him with the kind of warmth that said, "That's the man I know." One fan commented online, "They never needed to say anything. Their kindness spoke for them." And that's what made Keanu's revelation so powerful. It wasn't about shocking secrets. It was about uncovering a truth that had been visible all along, just unseen by most. Keanu and Sandra were two people who had quietly carried each other through moments of light and shadow, not lovers in the ordinary sense, but souls that mirrored kindness. A close friend of Sandra's later told a magazine, "Sandra always said that Keanu reminded her of peace. She said when she's around him, the world slows down." And Keanu, in another interview long ago, had said something strikingly similar. "She makes the world feel lighter. She gives everyone this energy, like the sun came out for a while." When fans placed those old quotes side by side, the internet fell silent. There it was, the same emotion reflected in both, years apart, never coordinated, never planned, and yet none of them ever claimed anything more than friendship. Maybe that was what made it sacred. It wasn't about possession or confession. It was about gratitude. After his confession at the charity event, a journalist asked Keanu off camera, "Why now? Why tell this story after so many years?" Keanu's reply was quiet. "Because the world forgets how powerful kindness can be. I wanted to remind myself, and maybe someone else, that small acts still matter." Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. People began sharing stories of their own, times when a small gesture changed their lives. The internet, usually full of gossip and noise, became filled with stories of kindness for days. Meanwhile, Sandra's quiet candle post had become a global symbol. People were leaving candles on windowsills, lighting them in memory of kindness, tagging their posts with messages like, "For someone who once gave me light." In interviews that followed, when reporters asked other actors about Keanu's words, they spoke with admiration. One said, "You can fake love on screen, but you can't fake respect. What they have is rare. It's not about who said what. It's about how they lived it." Another actor added, "They show us that connection doesn't need labels. It just needs truth." And that truth became the heart of the story. The deeper people looked, the more they realized this wasn't about uncovering a secret. It was about recognizing that kindness is the foundation of every lasting bond. Throughout his life, Keanu had faced loss, loneliness, and moments of silence that could break most people. Yet through it all, he carried that one candle, both real and symbolic, as a reminder that there's always someone somewhere who cares. And in that way, Sandra wasn't just a co-star or friend. She was part of his healing. She was proof that compassion doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. There was one particular story that surfaced again, a behind-the-scenes account from the lake house set. It was a rainy evening. Shooting had stopped and everyone was tired. Sandra noticed Keanu sitting quietly by himself, looking at the lake through the window. Without saying a word, she walked over, sat beside him, and shared a blanket. They didn't talk. They just sat in silence, listening to the rain. That moment never made it to interviews or magazines. It lived only in memory, until one of the crew members spoke about it years later. "It was peaceful," he said. They didn't need to fill the silence. It was like they understood each other without words. Now, when fans re-watched that film, every scene by the lake felt heavier, deeper, as if art had quietly mirrored their real connection. But what touched people most wasn't their closeness. It was their humility. Despite being two of the biggest stars in the world, they never tried to use their bond for publicity or headlines. They kept it private, sacred, and real. Keanu's revelation didn't destroy that privacy. it deepened it. It made people realize how deep gratitude can go when carried quietly for years. As Part 3 draws to a close, the story shifts. We begin to see that this revelation wasn't about shocking the world, but about teaching it. Keanu and Sandra's story became more than friendship or love. It became a reflection of something everyone longs for, to be remembered. Not for what we gave, but for how we made someone feel seen, understood, and valued. And yet, one mystery still lingers. What happened after the candle story went viral? How did Sandra respond privately to Keanu's heartfelt words? And what moment followed that would touch millions again? The answers to those questions, as the next part reveals, would prove that their connection wasn't just remembered. It was still alive and quietly shaping the world around them. Beyond the headlines, the true nature of their connection, the world couldn't stop talking. Every major network, every blog, every fan page, all filled with the same question. What did this revelation really mean? Was it love? Was it gratitude? Or something entirely different? Something that lived quietly beyond what words could describe? Yet while the world debated, Keanu and Sandra stayed silent. No statements, no interviews, no denials. Just quiet. And in that quiet, something beautiful happened. People started listening not to gossip, but to emotion. In Hollywood, silence is rare. But their silence spoke more than 1,000 headlines ever could. Then, 1 month after the charity event, Sandra returned to Los Angeles. She had just wrapped up a small independent film in Europe and kept her arrival private. No press, no photographers, just a few close friends waiting at the airport. Still, someone noticed her walking out, calm, smiling softly, holding a single white candle in her hand luggage. The image went viral within hours. Fans called it the quiet reply. No caption, no explanation, just Sandra, still and peaceful, carrying light. A few days later, she was invited to a humanitarian fundraiser, the same one Keanu had quietly helped organize years before. This time she attended. It was the first time they were seen in the same place since his revelation. When she walked in, the crowd rose in applause. But Sandra, humble as ever, simply waved and smiled. She looked around and saw Keanu across the room talking to a group of volunteers. Their eyes met for the first time in years. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just a look, deep and familiar, the kind that said, "You're still here," and that's enough. Later, when they sat down together for a small panel on kindness in the film industry, everyone waited for some emotional scene. But instead, what unfolded was even more powerful. The host asked gently, "Sandra, the world has been moved by Keanu's recent words. Would you like to share what you felt?" Sandra smiled, paused, and took a deep breath. "I think sometimes," she began softly, "we forget that kindness isn't meant to be explained. It's meant to be lived." The audience fell silent. She continued, "When you do something for someone, you don't think it'll be remembered. You just hope it helps them in that moment. I'm touched that it meant something to him, but I think he's given that light to others many more times than I ever did." Keanu, sitting beside her, looked down and smiled. He didn't interrupt, didn't add to her words. He just listened, the same way he always had. Then the host turned to him and asked, "Keanu, is there something you'd like to say?" He took a deep breath, then replied, "Only that I'm grateful, not just to Sandra, but to everyone who's ever done something small that made a big difference. I shared that story because I wanted people to know. Light spreads. She gave me light once, and I've tried to pass it on ever since." The hall erupted in gentle applause. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just heartfelt, the kind that fills a room with warmth. And right there, something quietly magical happened. The event organizers dimmed the lights for a moment, and hundreds of candles were lit across the hall. Each guest had one at their table. The glow reflected in Sandra's eyes, soft and golden. She looked around, smiled, and whispered, "See, Keanu, your light multiplied." He looked at her with the same calm warmth that the world knew so well, and simply nodded. "Ours did," he said softly. It was one of those moments that didn't need cameras, yet every camera caught it. The image of Keanu and Sandra, surrounded by candlelight, traveled across the world. Two people sitting side by side, sharing a quiet peace. But what the public didn't know was what happened after the event ended. When everyone left and the lights dimmed, Sandra stayed back to help pack up candles. Keanu joined her silently. For a while, they worked in silence, side by side, just like years ago on set. Then she turned to him and said softly, "You kept it all these years?" He smiled faintly. "Some lights don't go out," she nodded. "I didn't think you'd even remember." "How could I forget?" he replied, when it reminded me how to keep going. There was a quiet pause, not uncomfortable, but full of memories. Sandra finally whispered, "I'm glad it helped." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes gentle. "It didn't just help," he said. "It saved me." Those words hung in the air like something sacred. No one else heard them, just the two of them, standing in a dimly lit hall filled with flickering light. Outside, the night breeze moved softly, and the candles glowed through the windows like stars fallen to earth. For a moment, they both stood still, knowing that their connection had never been about fame or attention. It had been about humanity, about being there when the world felt heavy. As they parted that night, there was no dramatic goodbye, no tears. Just two people walking away with quiet gratitude in their hearts. The next morning, a small detail caught everyone's attention. At the event's exit, one candle had been left burning on the window ledge. Underneath it, a handwritten note said, "For everyone who once brought light." The handwriting wasn't Keanu's. It wasn't Sandra's either. It was written by one of the volunteers who had been inspired by their story. But that simple note captured everything. The purpose, the meaning, the quiet beauty of what had begun as one small act of kindness. And just like that, the story grew bigger than the two of them. It became a reminder for everyone watching that the purest connections aren't about possession, but about passing light forward. By now, people around the world were calling their bond a kindness legacy. Journalists wrote about how two people had managed to shift global attention from gossip to grace. As Part 4 ends, it becomes clear that the true nature of their connection isn't bound by time, distance, or definition. It's about how kindness once given can echo endlessly, lighting lives far beyond its first flame. But just as peace seemed to settle, something unexpected was about to happen. A gesture from Sandra that would reveal just how deeply she had carried that same light in her heart, all these years. The Unforgettable Legacy. Why this matter? Weeks passed after the candlelight event, yet the world still hadn't moved on. Everywhere you looked, online, in newspapers, in quiet conversations, people were still talking about Keanu and Sandra, not with gossip, but with tenderness. It was as if their story had reminded people of something the world had been slowly forgetting, that kindness never expires. In the middle of this growing warmth, something unexpected happened. Sandra announced that she would be funding a new scholarship program, not under her name, but under a phrase that everyone recognized instantly. It was called Light Through Broken Windows. When reporters asked her what inspired it, she smiled and said, "Someone once reminded me that light finds its way in, even when we feel shattered. I want this to remind others too." Her foundation would help young filmmakers who had lost someone or struggled with grief, giving them a chance to tell their stories. And to everyone who followed her journey, it was clear this was her way of passing the light back. When Keanu heard about it, he didn't post on social media. He didn't make any big statement. Instead, a quiet message arrived at the scholarship office a week later, a handwritten note and a donation in an unmarked envelope. The note simply said, "Thank you for keeping the light alive." It wasn't signed, but everyone knew who it was from. The story went viral again. But this time, it wasn't about who said what. It was about what two people had unknowingly started. Fans around the world began organizing small kindness drives in their cities, lighting candles in memory of lost loved ones, donating to local schools, or simply helping strangers. Hashtags like Why Light Still Finds a Way and Sag the Candle Project started trending. It wasn't a campaign, it was a movement born out of a whisper, not a shout. One evening, during a quiet interview, Sandra was asked what she thought about the global response. She paused for a long moment before answering. "Honestly," she said, "I didn't expect this. I just wanted to do something good. But maybe this proves that good things don't need noise. They just need heart." The interviewer then asked, "Do you think you and Keanu will ever work together again?" Her eyes softened. "We already are," she said gently. "Just not in the way people think. He's helping the world heal, one quiet act at a time. I'm just following that example." The word spread quickly, but what touched people most wasn't the possibility of another movie. It was the realization that their real partnership existed beyond screens. It lived in the kindness they shared, in the quiet ways they inspired each other and everyone around them. A few weeks later, something even more touching happened. At an award ceremony in New York, Keanu was honored for his humanitarian work. No one expected him to mention Sandra that night. The event wasn't about that. But when he stepped up to the microphone, he looked around the audience, took a deep breath, and said softly, "Tonight, I want to dedicate this to someone who once taught me that light doesn't need to be loud." The crowd grew still. He continued, "She gave me hope when I didn't ask for it. She reminded me that even in brokenness, there is beauty. So this isn't my award. It belongs to her, and to everyone who keeps kindness alive quietly." A camera panned across the hall, and for a moment, the audience noticed Sandra sitting in the crowd, eyes glistening. She smiled, not in surprise, but in deep peace. After the ceremony, they met briefly backstage. No fanfare, no press. Just two old friends standing in a hallway filled with flowers and applause echoing in the distance. Sandra looked at him and said softly, "You didn't have to do that." He smiled back, shaking his head. "I did. Because that's what you taught me. That gratitude deserves to be spoken at least once." There was a long, peaceful silence between them. Then Sandra said something that would stay with him forever. "Do you realize what you've done?" Keanu looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "You've made kindness go viral." He laughed quietly, but she wasn't joking. Because what started as one candle, one memory, had now become something the whole world was carrying forward. And that was the beauty of it. It was never planned, never forced. It came from honesty, from vulnerability, from one quiet act that turned into thousands. Film critics began calling it the kindness chain. Professors spoke about it in universities as a cultural phenomenon, how one moment of gratitude between two people changed global behavior online. And through it all, both Keanu and Sandra stayed humble, never claiming credit, never turning it into promotion. They continued to appear in each other's lives quietly. Small visits, shared projects, kind words at events, never publicized, never loud. What made people love them more wasn't what they said, but how they carried themselves. Humility had become their legacy. In one final interview before part 6 of their story began, Keanu was asked what all of this truly meant to him. The candle, the kindness, the movement. He thought for a moment, then said softly, "It means that no good thing is ever wasted. Even a small light can outlive us." And that's when the world realized this story wasn't just about Keanu and Sandra anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been touched by kindness and chosen to keep it alive. But there was still one final moment the world hadn't seen. Something that would bring their story full circle and prove once and for all that the truest connections never fade. The lasting light. How one quiet act changed everything. The story that began with a single candle had now touched millions of hearts. What started as one quiet revelation between two people had turned into a global wave of compassion. Yet for Keanu and Sandra, it was never about fame or attention. It was always about meaning. Months passed. Awards came and went. New headlines replaced old ones. But every time a fan lit a candle or donated to a stranger, their story quietly lived on. Then, one calm evening, something unexpected happened again. A small video clip appeared online, filmed by a passerby on a quiet Los Angeles street. It showed Keanu sitting outside a tiny cafe reading a letter with a gentle smile. Beside him on the table was a small candle flickering in the breeze. No cameras, no crowd, just peace. The video spread fast, of course. Fans noticed the handwriting on the letter and realized something. It matched Sandra's. She had written to him. The message, though private, was partly visible on the paper. The words read, "You once said light still finds a way. I just wanted to remind you, it still does." Keanu didn't respond publicly. He didn't need to. His expression in that quiet clip said everything. A soft, grateful smile, eyes full of warmth. A week later, during a film festival, he made a surprise appearance to introduce a short documentary. No one knew what it was until the title appeared on the screen, Through Broken Windows. It was produced anonymously, but viewers immediately recognized the tone: calm, emotional, human. The short film featured stories of ordinary people who had received help from strangers, a woman who was gifted groceries by someone she never met, a student who found hope after reading about the candle story, a child who drew a picture of light passing from one hand to another. As the film ended, the audience was silent for a long time. Then came a gentle wave of applause, the kind that comes from hearts, not hands. When Keanu walked onto the stage, he didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said softly, "This isn't my story. It's everyone's. Because kindness doesn't belong to one person. It just travels." And with that, he bowed and left the stage. Later that night, Sandra posted one last image on her private account. A window with light pouring through the cracks, and a caption beneath it. Some windows break. Others open. It became her final public note on the subject. After that, both she and Keanu quietly stepped away from the spotlight for a while, letting the movement live on without them. What they couldn't have known was that somewhere across the world, that movement was still growing. Schools began holding light days, where children lit candles for kindness. Film students began writing scripts about gratitude. Families who had been divided started reconnecting through simple messages of forgiveness. Their story had become a living echo, proof that kindness multiplies when passed forward. Years later, during a rare reunion interview, a journalist asked them both what they remembered most about everything that happened. Keanu smiled first, eyes soft with reflection. "The silence," he said, "because it wasn't about the noise. It was about what stayed after." Sandra added quietly, "And what stayed was kindness." The interviewer asked, "Do you still keep in touch?" They both smiled. That same quiet, familiar smile that the world had loved for decades. Keanu said, "Sometimes we don't need to. The connection's still there. It always will be." There was a long pause. And in that moment, it felt like every movie, every headline, every rumor had finally found its ending. Not in a confession, not in a love story, but in understanding. Because the truth was never about romance. It was about two souls who met, shared light, and carried it into the world, each in their own way. As the interview ended, the lights in the studio dimmed slightly. The cameras turned off. But before leaving, Sandra looked around and noticed a small candle burning on the table beside them. She smiled and whispered, "You brought one again?" Keanu shook his head softly. "Wasn't me." The crew member nearby smiled shyly. "We just thought it felt right." They both looked at the candle quietly, its light flickering gently between them. Keanu said softly, "See, that's how it works. One person lights it, and before you know it, the whole world glows." And that was how their story truly ended. Not with fireworks or fame, but with quiet, lasting peace. A story that began with a small act of compassion had grown into a global reminder that kindness never fades. It travels from heart to heart, from one small moment to another until it becomes something eternal. And somewhere, in a world full of noise and hurry, a single candle still burns by a window. Its flame steady, its light soft, its meaning clear, Because when kindness begins with truth, it never ends.